Now, just a little warning here at the start that there will be some major spoilers for the second episode of The Bad Batch called Cut and Run. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Alright, so I'm going to start this out by saying that so far I've been very pleasantly surprised and impressed with the series, which isn't to say I thought it was going to be bad or anything like that. I always have faith when Dave Filoni is involved in something, though yes, he was to some degree involved in Resistance, and well, that didn't turn out so well, but nobody is perfect. Anyway, I think my biggest fear or fears going into the series were that it was going to be rather heavy on the action but light on any real substance, especially in the characterization and development department. Which isn't to say I don't enjoy a heavy dose of mindless action from time to time, but I was afraid, after honestly not caring too much about the Bad Batch, the team itself, after their story arc in the Clone Wars, that I'd never really care about these characters because they'd end up as little more than strong guy, smart guy, the leader, and so on. And so I was thinking the best part of the show just might end up being what we see through their eyes, that we'd get a glimpse of what the galaxy is like during this transition phase from Republic to Empire, which we certainly are seeing, and that the highlights along the way just might be seeing other characters, some of the characters with sort of hanging character arcs from the Clone Wars, with examples being Barriss Offee or Cody or some of the bounty hunters, maybe even some of the Jedi whose fates are still up in the air. Like a Quinlan Vos would be pretty cool to see, and he'd actually fit in very well with the Bad Batch, I think. But so far, again, pleasantly surprised, the Bad Batch have indeed been the most interesting part of their own show, which, yes, really should be the case if you're going to name the show after them. Especially Hunter, who may have been my least favorite from the Clone Wars arc, but has quickly become my favorite here. And I'm really enjoying the bond that's already forming between him and Omega, and that he's actually thinking about her well-being, what's best for her, instead of her just kind of being there and them immediately accepting her. And though some might think this was a bit of a slow second episode, I was more than fine to get something like this, to get an episode where the underlying question on Hunter's mind is, should they be dragging Omega around the galaxy with them? What is actually best for her? And he realizes that maybe it's more reasonable for him to let her go with Cut and Sue than to keep her around, even though, again, I think he's clearly taking a liking to her. But once more in this episode, she kind of proves her worth, that she can be an asset to the team, and in the end, she makes the choice to stay with them, even after seeing just how dangerous that can be. And Hunter then accepts her choice. And speaking of Omega, that was probably my other big fear going into the show, that she was going to be annoying or just way too much. But so far that hasn't been the case. So far I've liked her and what they've been doing with her. That, like I said in my review of the first episode, they've been making her far more curious than confident or borderline cocky and thus annoying, which is kind of what happened to some degree with Ezra and Ahsoka at first in their shows. And I feel like she really is a good character for the younger kids to go on their first Star Wars adventure with. And I also really enjoyed when she got off the ship and took a deep breath and basked in the sun and played with the dirt, because that was the first time she'd ever been anywhere but the facility on Camino, and the first time she'd ever been on solid Earth before, which is weird to think. And that she didn't even know how to play catch with the other kids, that she'd probably never even really played before at all. And so I thought this was a really great scene, especially when Wrecker couldn't figure out what she was doing because he couldn't comprehend that not everybody travels the galaxy. And it was very reminiscent of Rey in The Force Awakens when she sees Takodano for the first time and says how she didn't know there was this much green in the whole galaxy, which was also a really, really good scene, one of her best, to be honest with you, and leaves me wishing we'd seen more of that Rey, the one who is more curious than completely confident all the time. But I digress. And also in this episode we learned, or maybe I should say basically had it confirmed, since I think we all suspected, that there is much more to Omega than we yet know. Tech at one point says that the Kaminoans never create anything without a purpose, meaning that she's probably not some random accident. They probably made her for some sort of reason. And I know there are theories out there already that say she could be anything from a clone of Palpatine to Rey's mother, because everybody is suspected to be Rey's mother until proven otherwise. But I really don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think it's going to be anything quite like that. I think in order to have some connection to the Mandalorian, she is going to be a Force-sensitive clone, maybe the first and only in existence, the only successful one, and it's going to give way to more experiments, and like I said, it's going to be connected to what we see in the Mandalorian, and who knows, maybe we'll even see a grown-up Omega at some point in the Mandalorian. Also in this episode, we again see the former clone trooper Cut along with his wife Sue and their 2 children, though they're not his biological children. And they all go back to an episode in Season 2 of the Clone Wars, one of the first to really start to dig into the mindset of the clones, where Rex, after he gets wounded, he encounters this clone deserter who has essentially become just a farmer with a family. And over the course of the episode, Rex comes to understand that Cut isn't a coward for running away or choosing not to fight in the war. He just made a choice to live a different life, which he has the right to do. While on the other hand, Rex decides it's his choice to keep fighting, though the more we learn about the chips, the more it seems like that wasn't the case at all. It seems like they really were programmed or being controlled to some extent, maybe a great extent by those chips, and not just because they were modified to be more docile and follow any orders given. And this is something I've always kind of wondered about since Season 6 of Clone Wars when we found out about them. I mean, we know they're called inhibitor chips, but just how much do they inhibit and how much do they actually flat out control? What is their exact function, or how exactly do they work? Because I get the impression by the way the clones carried out Order 66 in such a cold and detached fashion where they didn't hesitate at all, that the chips sort of reprogrammed them or their brains on the spot as soon as the order was given, or right after they heard those words, execute Order 66. But then again, as soon as the chip was removed from Rex's head, he basically went back to normal, which says he wasn't reprogrammed so much, he was just being controlled by the chip. Which I guess leads to the question, how much have they always been controlled by the chip? Because though yes, I know they were modified and sort of programmed from birth, I thought the chips were always just sort of there, not doing a whole lot or maybe anything at all, till Order 66 was given, and then they just full on took control. However, in this episode, Tech, who seems to have known all along about the chips being in their head, he basically says that the chips are kind of what has programmed them all along, so I find myself rather confused about just what is the deal with the chips. But either way, no matter how the chips work exactly, the clones do seem like the reset button has been hit. They do seem to have no concern about how they are now being used or what they're being told to do. That even after the war is over, they're being used to subjugate the galaxy and are out there giving people chain codes, which, as pointed out in the episode, is so very ironic, that the clones who were first assigned numbers and then given or took names are now giving out numbers to those originally given names, which to me felt, I don't know, it just felt sort of sad that this is what is happening to the clones. And I'm really hoping in this show we find out what happens to the bulk of them, what happens to the millions of clones, where do they go, what do they become, if anything? Are they shipped off to some random planet and left to rot, essentially? Could something even worse happen to them? Or maybe they're just let free upon the galaxy, though for some reason I highly doubt the Empire would do that. And speaking of just how many clones there are, I never cease to be amazed by the job D. Bradley Baker does in voicing all of them. It is insane that, for the most part, not only do most of them sound a bit different, but that he can keep them all straight. And that oftentimes in this show, and back in the Clone Wars, he's just talking to himself. But anyway, here to start to wrap this up, I thought this was another really good episode, and it's been a terrific start to the series in my opinion. Better than I thought it would be, and I did expect this to be pretty dang good despite some of my concerns, which honestly have been needless concerns so far. And again, maybe some out there might say this was a slower episode or a filler episode, or maybe not, who knows. But I think it's really important to build these characters early, to build this team, after I don't think they really popped or made me care all too much about them personally in the Clone Wars arc that they were in. And so far, Hunter and Omega have been great, and I think Tech's been handled relatively well, and there's plenty of potential there, while Wrecker is mainly just becoming that lovable, dumb brute type, though I do hope they can find something to do with him beyond that. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this second episode and what you're thinking of the show overall so far. Is this what you were hoping for, or maybe more, or maybe less? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.